Imagine a showdown so epic that it determines the fate of an entire nation. Picture this: a lone prophet standing against hundreds of rivals on a high mountain, surrounded by a sea of spectators. On one side, Elijah, a fearless prophet of a single true God. On the other, hundreds of prophets worshiping Baal, a god revered by many. The challenge? Which God will answer by fire, whose altar will burst into flames first. This isn't just a tale of faith versus idolatry. It's a gripping drama of courage, confrontation, and the quest for truth amidst deception. Today, we delve into the riveting story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Who will triumph when everything is on the line? Stay with us as we uncover how this incredible story unfolded and what it continues to teach us today. To understand the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, we need to journey back to a time when Israel was in a state of deep spiritual crisis. King Ahab ruled the land, but it was his wife, Jezebel, who truly dominated the religious landscape. A fervent devotee of Baal, Jezebel had not only introduced but aggressively propagated Baal worship throughout Israel. This wasn't just a shift in religious practices. It was a complete upheaval of the nation's spiritual identity, leading to the widespread erection of Baal altars and shrines. Under Jezebel's influence, the worship of Yahweh, the God of Israel, was ruthlessly suppressed. The prophets of Yahweh were systematically hunted down and killed, forcing the survivors to flee and hide in remote places. Imagine living in a society where your faith is not only illegal but deadly. The Israelites were torn between the seductive promises of Baal worship and the fear of the queen's wrath. As Baal worship thrived, the moral and spiritual decay of Israel deepened, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between the forces of idolatry and the steadfast faith in Yahweh. King Ahab, though powerful, was seen as weak and easily swayed by Jezebel. His reign marked a period of unprecedented apostasy in Israel's history. The people, caught in the crossfire of this religious conflict, were desperate. The land was parched, suffering under a severe drought that Elijah, Yahweh's prophet, had declared would last until God decreed otherwise. Baal, revered as the god of storms and fertility, seemed impotent in the face of this crisis. The drought was not just a physical calamity but a symbolic reflection of the spiritual drought gripping Israel. Elijah's emergence as a lone voice of Yahweh in this tumultuous period was nothing short of miraculous. His bold proclamation of a drought was a direct challenge to Baal's authority, striking at the very heart of what Baal was supposed to control. For 3.5 years, the drought lingered, and the people's desperation grew. Elijah's fearless stance against Ahab and Jezebel symbolized the unyielding power of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. As the drought worsened, the stage was set for a dramatic encounter that would determine the true God of Israel. In these dark times, Elijah's very name, meaning "My God is Yahweh," became a beacon of defiance against the overwhelming tide of idolatry. The drought, both a physical and spiritual scourge, left Israel on the brink of collapse. Amidst this desolation, the people longed for relief and a sign of hope. Elijah's challenge to the prophets of Baal was not merely about ending the drought, but about reclaiming the spiritual heart of Israel. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the upcoming confrontation promised to reveal once and for all the true source of divine power in the land. In the midst of Israel's spiritual decline stood Elijah, a solitary figure of unwavering faith and conviction. Elijah, whose very name means "My God is Yahweh," was more than just a prophet. He was a beacon of resistance against the overwhelming tide of idolatry sweeping the nation. Born in Tishbe, Elijah appeared on the scene without fanfare but with a mission that would shake the foundations of Israel. He was a man of rugged determination, often described as wearing a garment of hair and a leather belt around his waist, symbolizing his austere life and unyielding spirit. Elijah's first significant appearance in the Bible is a dramatic one. He boldly approaches King Ahab with a startling proclamation. There will be no dew or rain in the land except at his word, a declaration of divine judgment against the king's and Jezebel's idolatry. This pronouncement wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a direct confrontation with Baal, who was worshipped as the god of rain and fertility. By predicting a drought, Elijah was essentially challenging Baal's power and exposing his impotence. The drought would last for 3.5 years, a period of severe hardship for the people and a testament to the futility of Baal worship. During this time of drought, Elijah lived a life on the run, often hiding in desolate places to escape Jezebel's wrath. His faith and resilience were tested as he relied entirely on God for his survival. One of the most poignant episodes of his life was his stay by the brook Cherith, where he was fed by ravens sent by God. Later, he found refuge with a poor widow in Zarephath, a small town outside of Israel, where he performed miracles that sustained both his life and that of his hosts. These events highlighted not only Elijah's dependence on God, but also God's provision and protection for those who remained faithful. Elijah's confrontations weren't limited to mere declarations or miraculous survival. He was deeply involved in the spiritual warfare of his time. As Jezebel continued her campaign to exterminate Yahweh's prophets, Elijah's sense of isolation grew. He famously lamented to God that he was the only prophet left, a cry of despair that underscores the loneliness and peril he faced. Yet, even in his solitude, Elijah's courage never wavered. He continued to confront Ahab and Jezebel with unflinching resolve, driven by his mission to restore the worship of Yahweh in Israel. One of the most striking aspects of Elijah's character is his relentless dedication to his calling. Despite the constant threats to his life and the overwhelming odds against him, he never compromised his message or his faith. His life was a testament to the power of one individual's commitment to truth and righteousness in the face of widespread corruption and idolatry. Elijah's actions, from challenging the prophets of Baal to reviving the widow's son, were all geared towards one goal: demonstrating the supremacy of Yahweh over all false gods. Elijah's journey was far from easy, marked by moments of intense trial and profound loneliness. Yet, each step he took was guided by a deep sense of purpose and an unshakable belief in the power of Yahweh. As the drought ravaged the land and the people's desperation grew, Elijah's role as a prophet became ever more crucial. He was not just a messenger of doom, but a beacon of hope, calling the nation back to its true faith. His life and mission were preparing for the ultimate showdown on Mount Carmel, a confrontation that would forever alter the spiritual landscape of Israel. As the drought continued to devastate Israel, tension mounted between the followers of Yahweh and the devotees of Baal. Elijah, emboldened by his faith and the dire need to turn the people back to Yahweh, called for a decisive showdown. This would not be a private contest, but a public spectacle set on Mount Carmel, a location symbolically neutral and geographically significant. Mount Carmel, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, was a place where many believed both Baal and Yahweh could be worshipped, making it the perfect battleground for this ultimate test of divine power. Elijah sent out a bold challenge to King Ahab: gather all of Israel at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who ate at Jezebel's table. Ahab, perhaps driven by desperation due to the relentless drought or by a desire to silence Elijah once and for all, agreed. The scene was set for an extraordinary confrontation. As the people assembled on the mountain, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation and uncertainty. Would Baal, the god of storm and fertility, finally demonstrate his power? Or would Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, reveal his supremacy? On that fateful day, Elijah stood alone against the combined might of 850 prophets. He began by addressing the gathered Israelites, posing a piercing question that struck at the heart of their divided loyalties. How long will you waver between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. This question wasn't just rhetorical. It demanded a choice, a return to spiritual commitment amidst the confusion and apostasy that had plagued Israel. The people, caught in a web of idolatry and fear, remained silent, their indecision reflecting the nation's deep spiritual crisis. Elijah then proposed a dramatic test to determine the true God. 2 bulls would be provided, one for the prophets of Baal and one for Elijah. Each would prepare an altar and place their bull upon it, but without setting fire to it. The challenge was simple: the God who answered by fire, consuming the sacrifice, would be acknowledged as the true God. This was a direct challenge to Baal, who was often depicted as a storm god wielding lightning. For Baal's prophets, this seemed like an opportunity to vindicate their deity. For Elijah, it was a moment to demonstrate Yahweh's unparalleled power. With the terms set, the prophets of Baal eagerly took up the challenge. They prepared their bull, laid it on the altar, and began calling on the name of Baal from morning until noon. "O Baal, answer us!" they shouted, performing their frenzied dances around the altar they had made. But as hours passed, there was no response. No fire fell from heaven. Elijah, observing their frantic efforts, began to taunt them with biting sarcasm. "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." Despite their fervent cries and increasingly desperate antics, including self-mutilation, Baal's prophets could not elicit any response. Their silence was deafening, a stark contrast to their earlier confidence. The scene grew more chaotic as they continued to shout and slash themselves, but it was all in vain. The futility of their worship became increasingly apparent, and the people watching from the sidelines could see the stark difference between the empty rituals of Baal and the simple, yet profound, faith of Elijah. As the day wore on, it became clear that Baal was not going to answer. The time for Elijah's demonstration was drawing near. He called the people closer and began to repair the altar of Yahweh that had been torn down. Using 12 stones, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel, he rebuilt the altar in the name of Yahweh. He dug a trench around the altar and arranged the wood on it. Then, in a surprising move, he ordered that 4 large jars of water be poured over the offering and the wood, not once, but 3 times, until the water ran down and filled the trench. This act, seemingly counterintuitive, was designed to leave no doubt about the divine nature of the fire that was to come. With the stage set on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal began their fervent attempts to summon fire from their god. From morning until noon, they called out to Baal, "O Baal, answer us!" The intensity of their pleas filled the air, their voices rising and falling with a desperate rhythm. They danced around their altar, engaging in rituals designed to capture their god's attention. The crowd watched in anticipation, hoping to see some sign of Baal's power. However, as the hours ticked by, their cries met only silence, a void that grew more oppressive with each passing moment. As midday approached, the prophets of Baal became increasingly frantic. They leaped about the altar, performing their elaborate rituals with even greater vigor, but still, there was no response. The tension in the air was palpable. Elijah, observing the spectacle, could not help but mock their futile efforts. He taunted them with cutting words, suggesting that perhaps their god was deep in thought, or busy or traveling. "Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened," he jeered, highlighting the absurdity of their situation. Elijah's sarcasm stung, but it also served to underscore the impotence of Baal in the face of their urgent pleas. Spurred on by Elijah's taunts and their own growing desperation, the prophets of Baal escalated their efforts. They began to slash themselves with swords and spears, a common ritualistic act of self-mortification intended to provoke their god's pity and response. Blood flowed freely as they danced and shouted, their voices hoarse with hours of relentless invocation. The sight was both tragic and grotesque, a vivid demonstration of their utter despair and the extremity of their devotion. Yet, despite their blood and pain, Baal remained silent. No fire came to consume their sacrifice, and the futility of their actions became increasingly apparent to all who watched. By mid-afternoon, their once fervent cries had devolved into hoarse whispers, and their movements slowed as exhaustion set in. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the prophets' once exuberant energy was all but spent. The people of Israel, who had gathered to witness this grand contest, began to shift uncomfortably. They had watched the prophets of Baal exert every ounce of their strength and will, yet their God had given no sign. The silence from Baal was deafening, and in that silence, the truth began to dawn on the crowd. They saw the contrast between the frenzied, desperate rituals of Baal's followers and the calm confidence of Elijah. It was a dramatic prelude to what was about to come, a clear indication that the power they sought was not to be found in Baal. As the prophets of Baal collapsed in defeat, their voices silenced by exhaustion and despair, Elijah stepped forward to take center stage. The sun had now passed its zenith, and the time for the evening sacrifice was drawing near. With deliberate, calm movements, Elijah called the people closer, inviting them to witness what was about to unfold. He began by rebuilding the ancient altar of Yahweh, which had been neglected and torn down. Using 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, he meticulously reconstructed the altar, symbolizing the unity and heritage of the nation under God. Once the altar was rebuilt, Elijah did something unexpected. He ordered that the sacrifice and the wood be drenched with water. He had the people fill 4 large jars with water and pour it over the offering and the wood. This was repeated 3 times, until the water soaked the wood and filled the trench around the altar. This act was both a statement and a challenge. By saturating the altar, Elijah made it clear that no natural fire could ignite the sacrifice. It was a definitive setup for a divine intervention, ensuring that when fire came, there would be no doubt that it was the work of Yahweh. With the preparations complete, Elijah stood alone beside the drenched altar. The silence that had followed the prophets of Baal's frantic cries now settled heavily over the assembly. All eyes were on Elijah, and a hush fell as he lifted his voice in prayer. Unlike the wild cries of Baal's prophets, Elijah's prayer was simple and profound. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," he began, invoking the covenant God of their ancestors. "Let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command." His words were a humble request for God to reveal himself, not for Elijah's glory, but so that the people might turn their hearts back to him. Elijah continued, asking God to answer him so that the people would know that Yahweh is God and that he was turning their hearts back to him. The sincerity and depth of Elijah's prayer contrasted sharply with the chaotic, desperate cries of Baal's prophets. Here was a man utterly confident in his God, speaking with a quiet assurance that resonated through the crowd. As he finished his prayer, the air seemed to thrum with expectation. Then, without warning, a brilliant blaze of fire descended from heaven, engulfing the altar in a consuming flame. The fire of Yahweh was not just any fire. It burned with an intensity that astonished everyone present. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the dust, and licked up the water in the trench. In an instant, the saturated altar was reduced to nothing but scorched earth, leaving no room for doubt about the source of the fire. This was no ordinary flame. It was a direct and unmistakable manifestation of divine power. The people fell on their faces in awe and fear, proclaiming, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah's faith and God's power had decisively ended the contest. The fire from heaven had not only consumed the sacrifice but had also reignited the faith of the people of Israel. This dramatic display was a powerful reminder of Yahweh's supremacy and a call to return to true worship. In that moment, the spiritual darkness that had gripped Israel began to lift, dispelled by the light of God's unmistakable presence. The silence that followed was not one of confusion or fear, but of reverence and renewed belief in the God who had answered by fire. As the fire from heaven consumed the drenched sacrifice, the people of Israel, who had been spectators of the showdown on Mount Carmel, were overwhelmed with awe and fear. The sight of the altar engulfed in divine flames left no room for doubt about Yahweh's supremacy. A collective realization dawned upon them. Their allegiance to Baal had been a grave error. As the fire receded, they fell prostrate, their voices uniting in a chorus of conviction. "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" This spontaneous declaration was a profound acknowledgement of Yahweh's unrivaled authority and a collective renunciation of Baal. In the wake of this dramatic affirmation, the people's attitude towards Elijah shifted significantly. He was no longer just a solitary prophet challenging the status quo, but a proven vessel of divine power and truth. Empowered by this newfound faith and emboldened by the miraculous event they had witnessed, the crowd turned their attention to the prophets of Baal. These 450 men, who had confidently called upon their God in vain, now found themselves at the mercy of the very people they had deceived. Elijah, seizing this moment of renewed spiritual clarity among the Israelites, commanded them to seize the false prophets. The people, driven by a mixture of righteous indignation and the need to cleanse their land of idolatry, swiftly obeyed Elijah's orders. They captured the prophets of Baal, leading them down from the heights of Mount Carmel to the Kishon Valley below. This descent was symbolic, a dramatic reversal of the prophet's previous elevated status. In the valley, Elijah carried out a decisive act of justice, executing the prophets of Baal. This was not merely an act of vengeance, but a necessary purging of the corrupting influence that had led Israel astray. It was a fulfillment of the law that demanded the eradication of false prophets who had seduced the people into idolatry. The valley, once a place of life and sustenance, now bore witness to the grim end of Baal's prophets. Their downfall served as a stark warning to any who might consider returning to the worship of false gods. The execution of these prophets marked a turning point, a moment of reckoning that underscored the severity of leading God's people away from the truth. It was a powerful reminder of the consequences of idolatry and the importance of faithfulness to Yahweh. This act, though severe, was essential in reestablishing the nation's commitment to their true God and cleansing the land from the defilement of Baal worship. With the prophets of Baal removed, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of renewal and hope. The people, who had witnessed the raw power of Yahweh and participated in the purging of idolatry, stood at the cusp of a new beginning. The execution of Baal's prophets was more than just a physical cleansing. It signaled the start of a spiritual revival. As the rain began to fall, soaking the parched earth, it mirrored the renewal of faith among the Israelites. They had seen the futility of their false gods and the unquestionable might of Yahweh. This dramatic turn of events on Mount Carmel set the stage for a deeper return to the worship and commandments of the Lord. As the dust settled from the fiery display and the echoes of the people's shouts faded into the air, the scene shifted from the drama of divine fire to a desperate anticipation for the long-awaited rain. For 3.5 years, the land had suffered under the grip of an unyielding drought, a punishment for Israel's infidelity. With the prophets of Baal vanquished and the people's hearts turned back to Yahweh, Elijah's focus moved to the promise of rain. He knew that the physical restoration of the land would follow their spiritual renewal, and it was time to call forth the rains that had been withheld for so long. Elijah climbed back to the summit of Mount Carmel, where moments earlier, fire had fallen from heaven. This time, instead of calling down flames, he knelt down with his face between his knees, a posture of deep humility and intense prayer. His servant stood by, ready to relay any sign of change in the sky. "Go and look toward the sea," Elijah instructed. The servant obeyed, but returned with disappointing news. "There is nothing there." Unperturbed, Elijah sent him back 6 more times, each return bearing the same message. Elijah's persistence in prayer, undeterred by the initial lack of evidence, underscored his unwavering faith in God's promise. On the 7th trip, the servant returned with a glimmer of hope. "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea," he reported. This tiny cloud, barely perceptible on the horizon, was all Elijah needed. He immediately sent word to King Ahab, who was still at Carmel. "Hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Elijah's confident urgency, based on the mere sight of a small cloud, highlighted his profound trust in God's faithfulness. This little cloud was the harbinger of a monumental change, signaling the end of drought and the beginning of renewal for Israel. The sky, once clear and unyielding, quickly grew dark with swirling clouds. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of impending rain. In a matter of moments, the heavens opened, releasing a deluge that had been absent for years. The rain poured down in torrents, soaking the parched earth and filling the air with the fresh, life-giving scent of wet soil. For the people of Israel, this rain was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a tangible sign of God's mercy and a powerful confirmation of Elijah's prophetic authority. The long wait was over, and the land began to drink in the much-needed water, symbolizing the spiritual revival that had just begun among the people. Elijah, invigorated by the unfolding miracle, experienced the divine empowerment in a remarkable way. The Bible recounts that the power of the Lord came upon him, and he tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. This extraordinary feat, running ahead of the king's horses through the driving rain, showcased not only Elijah's physical endurance but also his renewed vigor and commitment to God's mission. The image of Elijah sprinting ahead of the storm encapsulated the energy and purpose that now infused his ministry, driving him forward even as the rains washed away the drought's harsh legacy. For the Israelites, the sight of Elijah leading the way through the stormy weather was emblematic of a new era. The rain was a profound sign that Yahweh had heard their cries, responded to their repentance, and restored his favor upon the land. As the waters drenched the fields and filled the streams, the promise of abundant harvests and rejuvenated life became a tangible reality. The physical refreshment mirrored their spiritual revival, heralding a season of renewed hope and prosperity under the watchful eye of their true God. The story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel is rich with powerful lessons and profound meanings that resonate far beyond its ancient setting. At its core, this narrative showcases the ultimate triumph of faith and truth over idolatry and falsehood. Elijah's unwavering belief in Yahweh, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, serves as a timeless example of the strength and courage required to stand firm in one's convictions. His actions remind us that true faith is not passive. It demands boldness and an unyielding commitment to act according to God's will, even when it leads to conflict with the prevailing culture. One of the most striking aspects of this story is the contrast between the frenzied, desperate cries of Baal's prophets and Elijah's calm, confident prayer. While the prophets of Baal exhausted themselves with rituals and self-mutilation, Elijah simply called upon the God of Israel with humility and assurance. This difference highlights the futility of false worship and the peace that comes from trusting in a real and responsive God. It's a powerful reminder that true worship is not about elaborate performances or outward displays, but about a sincere and heartfelt connection with the divine. Elijah's quiet confidence stands as a testament to the power of genuine faith in the face of life's storms. The miraculous descent of fire from heaven and the subsequent rain are not merely acts of divine intervention but profound symbols of God's presence and favor. The fire that consumes the drenched sacrifice signifies God's undeniable power and willingness to answer his people's earnest pleas. It's a vivid demonstration that God is not distant or detached. He is actively involved in the lives of those who seek him earnestly. Similarly, the rain that follows symbolizes renewal and restoration. After a period of spiritual and physical drought, the rain brings life back to the barren land, illustrating God's ability to restore and rejuvenate even the most desolate circumstances. This serves as a metaphor for personal and communal renewal, reminding us that no situation is beyond God's transformative power. Elijah's story also speaks to the importance of leadership and the responsibility it entails. By confronting Ahab and challenging the prophets of Baal, Elijah took a stand not just for himself but for the entire nation of Israel. His actions catalyzed a moment of collective repentance and recommitment to Yahweh. This aspect of the story underscores the impact that one courageous individual can have in guiding others toward truth and righteousness. It encourages us to consider how we can influence those around us by standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult or unpopular. Elijah's example calls us to be agents of change, willing to lead others towards a deeper understanding and relationship with God. Lastly, the aftermath of the confrontation on Mount Carmel reveals the ongoing struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. The execution of Baal's prophets was not just a punishment but a necessary act to rid Israel of the corrupting influence of idolatry. It underscores the idea that true transformation often requires decisive and sometimes harsh actions to eliminate the sources of falsehood and sin. This part of the story invites us to reflect on the areas in our own lives where we may need to take bold steps to remove influences that lead us away from our faith and values. It challenges us to examine our own allegiances and to choose, with clarity and conviction, to follow the path of truth and righteousness. In sum, the narrative of Elijah and the prophets of Baal is more than just an ancient tale of divine power. It's a profound exploration of faith, truth, and the enduring struggle between devotion to God and the lure of false idols. It calls us to a deeper faith, a more sincere worship, and a commitment to living out our beliefs with courage and integrity. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded that, like Elijah, we are called to stand firm in our faith, trust in God's provision, and lead others towards a renewed relationship with Him. As we draw to the close of Elijah's dramatic encounter with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, it's essential to reflect on the enduring impact of the story. This event wasn't just a momentary victory for Elijah, but a pivotal turning point for the nation of Israel. It represented a profound call to return to the covenant relationship with Yahweh. The people's collective declaration, "The Lord, He is God," signified more than a recognition of Yahweh's supremacy. It was a renunciation of their previous waywardness and a heartfelt recommitment to their faith. This story serves as a timeless reminder of the importance of steadfast faith and the power of divine intervention in moments of crisis. Elijah's journey through this confrontation highlights the personal struggles and the extraordinary strength that faith can provide. Despite standing alone against a multitude, Elijah's confidence in God's power remained unshaken. This courage in the face of overwhelming odds challenges us to examine our own faith. Are we willing to stand firm in our beliefs when faced with adversity or ridicule? Elijah's example encourages us to trust in God's presence and power, knowing that He can turn the tide even when we feel outnumbered or alone. It's a call to cultivate a faith that is bold and resilient, capable of enduring through trials and challenges. The reaction of the people of Israel also offers significant insights into the nature of collective repentance and renewal. Their immediate response to the fire from heaven and the subsequent rain was a powerful expression of communal transformation. This moment of turning back to Yahweh underscores the potential for widespread change when individuals unite in their commitment to truth and righteousness. It reminds us that true revival often begins with a collective acknowledgement of past wrongs and a shared resolve to pursue a better path. The story challenges communities today to seek genuine repentance and renewal, striving together to align more closely with divine principles and values. Furthermore, the aftermath of the confrontation, the execution of the prophets of Baal, and the return of rain illustrates the often harsh realities of purging corruption and restoring order. Elijah's actions, though severe, were necessary to break the stronghold of Baal worship that had ensnared Israel. This highlights the difficult choices and actions that sometimes accompany the journey towards spiritual and moral restoration. It calls us to consider what idols in our own lives or societies need to be confronted and removed to facilitate genuine growth and renewal. The story of Mount Carmel thus becomes a metaphor for the transformative process that involves both destruction and rebuilding, leading to a more profound and authentic relationship with God. As we reflect on this ancient narrative, it's clear that its lessons are as relevant today as they were in Elijah's time. The story of Mount Carmel is a powerful testament to the enduring struggle between faith and idolatry, truth and falsehood. It's a reminder that divine power is not just a distant concept but an active force in the world, capable of intervening in the most dramatic and life-changing ways. Elijah's encounter with the prophets of Baal invites us to examine our own lives, to seek out the areas where we need to recommit to our faith, and to trust in the transformative power of God. This story encourages us to live with the same boldness and conviction that Elijah demonstrated, knowing that we serve a God who is both mighty and merciful. Thank you for watching our video on Elijah and the incredible story on Mount Carmel. Remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 17 verse 20. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Thank you and see you next time.